Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I know we're near the end of the day, and holding your attention is not going to be easy. But I've got a wonderful set of panelists who have assured me that they will perform to your heart's content. So I hope you please give them your full attention. This is a very important topic, and many of you may be wondering, what is the role of digital with something that's very much focused on the environment? And I think this is actually particularly topical for India, where we're about to undertake this whole conversation on how does India be competitive in the space of green technology. And if we actually think about the online space, the tech space, the digital space, that's an area India is already competitive in. So perhaps there is a real opportunity when we think about where we can be competitive on green to think about the intersection between digital and green technology. And I've got a set of wonderful panelists who will talk about what I think are really three things that we need to cover. The first thing we need to cover is what's fundamentally needed at the infrastructure layer in the digital space to allow green tech to flourish. India has done so well by introducing digital public infrastructure in places like payments, in places like your digital ID, and that has enabled an enormous amount of innovation. What's the corollary for climate? Is it satellite imagery? Is it maps of soil health? Is it understanding exactly where our farmers are, what they're producing? What will allow innovation to then flourish? What are those digital public pieces of infrastructure? And then secondly, how do we unleash our entrepreneurs in this space? What are those spaces of innovation? And I think it's great to have Sanjeev, for example, here, who can talk a lot about the opportunity for entrepreneurs in that climate tech space, something he already is spending some time investing in. So we'll cover all of this with a bit of a particular focus. I would say this panel is particularly focused on farmers and food, which I think is one of the hottest spaces that is looking at climate tech and digital. So to kick us off, and really, I think this is a question for both our panelists from NABARD and Dr. Purvi, yourself as well. If you think about what it takes for today for us to be able to serve farmers, and you're looking at the kind of decision-making that's needed for us to be able to think about how they're going to make this enormous transition that needs to happen as far as climate tech is concerned. What's the data layer that's missing? What's the information that needs to be made available so that we can actually build the kind of climate tech solutions that are needed? What's that fundamental layer that you think might be important for entrepreneurs? And I'll get either of you to kick us off.
First of all, thank you for having me here. I think, so you raised a very fundamental question, but very important question. What is missing and what is it that needs to be done? So I would say, there are already technologies available, and we are already gaining out of it, but they are in very far and few. And the adoption level at the ground level is very low. So what we are looking at actually at NABARD and how we can figure it out is we are working on creating very sound institution at the ground level. So that is the most important thing. That how do you create communities? How do you create very strong, fundamentally strong institutions at the ground level? Because once you are able to create those strong institutions at the ground level, then implementation of whatever is there either in the lab or the entrepreneurs have developed, then it becomes much easier to implement it at the ground level. So I'll give you one example how we are trying to do it and what we are trying to do it. So at the ground level, we know there are different type of community-based organizations. So you must have heard about the self-help groups, the farmers producer organization. And one more important, very important layer at the ground level is the cooperative societies. So there are about more than 1 lakh cooperative societies right now. how they can be the agent of change at the ground level. So what we are doing is we are strengthening them. How we are strengthening? We are, first of all, we are digitizing all these out of 1,80,000 cooperative societies we are digitizing. Digitizing because right now there are certain challenges in terms of their governance, in terms of their transparency, in terms of their efficiency. So the digitization process will bring in all these things. And they play a very important role at the ground level. If you really see, they are providing both credit and non-credit services. Credit services for the agriculture sector, and you can name anything, they can provide that sort of a service at the ground level to their members, to their communities. So if you can really strengthen them, first is through digital mode, they digitize their operations. Then we improve their entire business processes. And once they are able to develop a good business process, then all our activities, different types of services, whether it is government-led services or it is entrepreneurship-led services. For example, recently we are implementing a seed production through the members of these cooperative societies. We have worked with the agriculture university, we are working with the state government, and a combination of these activities through these members of these cooperative societies, we are trying to produce seed at the ground level through them for climate resilient agriculture and those drought prone varieties.
Yep.
So that becomes very important because at the ground level you have somebody to look after, they are capable, and they are all member driven organizations. So that becomes a very important piece. So that will be, I think, the most important thing, that we develop such capable institution which can take everything what is happening, either the government priorities schemes or even things like on climate change or the climate resilient agriculture. So that piece would be the most important thing. That is what we.
So my takeaway from what you're saying is, as we think about implementing ideas, whether they're entrepreneurship, whether it's new technology, you're building the public infrastructure for delivery. You're building the ability for all of these collectives to be able to enact these solutions. Dr. Purvi, what about data? What's the, so this is a really interesting human infrastructure. Is there a data infrastructure that's missing in India which will allow us to fully understand the challenges and the opportunities that we need to put into, especially in food systems, which I know you're passionate about?
Thanks, Gaurav. I think India is one of the very, very few developing nations which invested in data and data infrastructure early on. In fact, the Indian Statistical Institute was set up way before such a system was set up in a place like the United States, for example. So the thrust on data, the importance of data in this country has been for a very long time. To your question, how do we translate this data, right? Data is a means and not an end. And sometimes we as academic community, we as scientific community don't realize that. Data for what? And data to do what? If I am a farmer in a place in Jharkhand, for example, today my land records are on a collector office's notebook. Tomorrow you are digitizing it and putting it on the computer. What difference does it make to a farmer? So data for what is going to be an extremely important component of that. There is so much that's already happening, right, in terms of how data are being utilized. There are platforms that are created. For example, one of the best ways of sort of reaching out to people during COVID with the vaccines and with the value chain enhancement was actually using the fundamental agriculture data, which in most states was a comprehensive list of who's the farmer, where the farmer is, where are these people, how many people, that sort of thing. And that's what made our response very, very fast. So today there are several areas in food security and climate where data is being used as a platform, right? If you start from a production side, for example, digital breeding, a variety that would take an average of 8.5 years to develop because of digital breeding, now the average time has come down to 11 months. So,
Can you just explain that? I think
So-
most people, when they hear digital breeding, are quite confused.
So-
So tell us more.
So basically, one of the ways to adapt to the changing climate is to constantly invest into, as public sector and private sector, into varieties which are more tolerant to the kind of heat we are experiencing, the varieties that are more tolerant to the changes in climate. And so quick varieties, the rice, for example, that we used to grow 40 years ago, 50 years ago, was based only on a trait which was very high productivity. That same rice with 1.5 degree higher temperature, there needs to be a varietal difference in that. This is a huge opportunity, Gaurav. As you know, globally, for example, the climate adaptation market last year, which is 2025, was $18 billion. In India, that market is growing at the rate of 12%. And so there is a huge opportunity. So I always say climate change is yes, an ecological phenomenon, but it is also a huge economic opportunity. And data platform need to capture that. My last point on data is data for what? Right?
Yes.
And I think we need much more in terms of not just production-centric interventions in agriculture, but market-centric intervention. Every time one invests into data, the question that one should ask is, what's my return on investment? So data, not just for the sake of data, but data for its very robust utility value to a farmer.
So this is an excellent point and a great segue to you, Sanjeev, because this question of data for what? Well, let's try and look at that at least from an entrepreneurship lens. And at Naukri.com, in some ways, Naukri is a data exchange platform. It is suppliers and demanders of jobs. And now if you put that hat on towards this whole opportunity in the green space, and we heard a little bit about what might be an opportunity in agri, what are you seeing as the opportunity for entrepreneurs to get into this space?
There are plenty of people who are trying. I think the challenge, and there's some funds also focused on it, but from a geopolitical lens, there's one challenge, right? With the regime change in the US in 2024, or earlier this year, 2025, suddenly the priority that the West was placing, the US was placing on climate and green, it changed, right? Europe is still interested.
And you're still investing.
We're still investing, but with the US going out of the equation, it does make a huge difference globally, right? So it'll help a lot if the US government changes its priorities. It's not about to do that, not under this regime. So we have to soldier on anyway, perhaps with limited resources and capabilities as compared to 2 years ago. Now, having said that, typically climate tech often requires large capex upfront. It often requires government support, regulatory support, subsidies, tax support, tax breaks in order to do something which is good for the environment, good for climate, but it makes money sense to not do it without that subsidy. I mean, even Tesla has lived on huge government subsidies, right? Simply because it is, without that subsidy, it is cheaper to go with the ICE, right? Now, electric vehicles is a big climate agenda, right? Globally, in India, China has really moved forward there. In India, we are moving forward, not as fast as China, perhaps, but it does require government support. Now, typically in climate tech, digital software, data, and hardware are usually married with data and software embedded into the solution. So very often digital doesn't stand alone. It stands alongside hardware, and hardware is capex intensive. Right? So there is, there is need for a financial sort of intervention by the government, perhaps regulatory intervention. Now, if you tell me that, listen, for the individual farmer in Punjab, it makes money sense to burn stubble. Right? That's why he does it.
It's a very topical choice. You just made.
That's why he does it. Because it makes money sense, it makes commercial sense, it makes business sense, it makes farming sense. Burn the stubble and plant the next crop. It is faster, it is cheaper. Right? For him, it's better. Collectively, it's a disaster. So what can be done? What can be done to change this incentive? Because you can't just give lectures and say, don't do it, man. We'll do it anyway, because it makes money sense. So what can you do to ensure that it doesn't happen? You've got to change the financial incentive. Now that costs money. Where's that money going to come from? Either the government gives it, or the government charges a tax cess from the public at large and say, listen, if you don't want farmers to earn stubble, you pay this much money. And then we'll ensure that the farmer doesn't do it. Right? No government is going to implement it by force, because that in a democracy will be a disaster as far as votes are concerned. So you've got to change the financial incentive. Now, where would digital enter into? Digital will enter into it in terms of monitoring, satellites, tracking information systems. Right? So digital is not the solution. Digital is a part of the solution. Digital is an enabler. Right? In electric vehicles, I think battery management systems, especially when batteries use rare earth, therefore which is in scarce supply, you want batteries to last longer. Battery management systems, very often, we've invested in one or two such companies. They will optimize battery usage so that the battery life is increased. They're enabling a climate solution. So very often, digital will be a part of the solution, but it will not be the solution.
Absolutely. I mean, it is an input, but I think there are times where it's a fundamental infrastructure layer. That it supports many things. Digital ID in India has supported lots and lots of different innovation, even though it's only obviously a part of every solution. And I think what would be really interesting to understand is, where is it that we need to make those big investments? Is it, Mr. Rawat, I'll come to you on this. Is it satellite imagery? Do we need to make it just free and easily accessible for us to understand what's going on in terms of weather patterns and what's happening down to 1 square meter of this country easily, so that entrepreneurs can start to think of new business models and new ideas to serve? And I think that's especially important for agri. Is the government, is NABARD, are others thinking about what are some of those big pieces of digital infrastructure that can unleash innovation, just like we've managed to do in other spaces?
So I think one of the very important initiative that government has taken is the Digital Agriculture Mission. So they are building an agri-stack. Within that agri-stack, the farm registry, farmers registry, will be developed. So I think that is going to be the huge area. So farmer and farming. So the crop registry will also be there, the farmers registry will be there, and the land. So a lot of work has already started and completed, and they are at different stages in different states. So it's already happening. So for example, I'll give you one example. On the basis of digitization of land records and few other integration, Reserve Bank of India Innovation Hub, RBI Innovation Hub, has come out with a ULI platform. So that platform is using different integration, including the land data record, where the state governments have completely digitized it, for seamless credit flow to the farmers. So it's helping. So similarly, when under this digital agriculture mission, if these three things are stabilized, I said farm, farmer, and farming. These three registered things are stabilized. The data is sanitized. I think on top of that, multiple layers of innovations can happen. And they are also building on top of this different types of advisories. So these three will be the fundamental things that they are trying to capture. On top of this, around this, there will be different layers where the different entities across the country will be in a position to place whatever they have developed, whatever their technology, whatever information they have. For example, from our side, we are having a MOU with AgriStack to provide data related to financing, data related to scale of finance to them. And if that sits on top of this AgriStack, these basic three information, then there are a host of other information that is available there. So I think it's going to play a very important role, very crucial role. And I would say, I would go to the extent that if these three things are actually stabilized, it can actually, a stage may come when you can actually pinpoint which area, which crop, how much quantity, how many farmers, you can actually, at a click of a mouse, actually you can generate. It can actually control your overall inflation, food inflation in the longer term. So I think that is the probability we see, that is the possibility, potential that we see. But the only thing will be how quickly we are able to stabilize that, how good is that data. So government is already taking initiative, and we are partnering with government in a big way. We are also having one data set on digital data on climate resilient agriculture. So we are integrating this data from different states, climate happenings for the last 10, 15 years. 7, 8 states we have already collected that data piece. So if you integrate this and use it as an advisory tool to the farmers, farming community, and we are trying to integrate different pieces. So for example, I talked about the ground level institutions, strong ground level institutions. They are there in place. They tie up or link with the digital agri-stack that is there, that the government of India is planning through or implementing through the state governments. And then different types of advisories around that. So all these things integrated together can actually provide a host of new innovations which the agri-startups or the different types of startups or the innovators can build on. So I think the opportunity is almost like the fintech revolution that we have in our country. So on the Jam Trinity, there are so much of innovation. The similar scale can happen through this agri-stack and this cooperative stack that we are developing.
No, and this is very exciting, and it's really interesting to see you not just talk about the digital, but also you started with the physical, which is particularly important. And I want to take this, what is obviously an infrastructure and 30,000-foot view, down to an individual farmer. And Dr. Purvi, I want to come back to you because you said, so what? And I think the so what is, what does it do for a farmer? And let's start with the notion that, this is a person who's on the front lines of everything we're talking about. They're a steward of ecosystem services today. If you look at all of the conversations, they're either around nutrition challenges, well, that sits with farmers. Their adaptation to climate, that sits with farmers. Food security sits with farmers. Lifestyle, challenges with man-animal conflict sits with farmers. And then a lot of our opportunity in terms of thinking about moving from poverty up into middle income, a lot of that is what's going to happen to smallholder farmers. So the farmers are sitting right at the crux and the center of this, right? What do they need? It would be great to hear from you. What is the innovation they need? And then I will turn it back to you, Sanjeev, to think about, well, are you seeing that kind of innovation happen, especially in your investment frame?
Thanks, Gaurav. I think if you had asked me the same question 10 years ago, my first thing to say would be that the farmers need information, the farmers need knowledge. In 2014, only about 40% of India's farmers had access to any extension system and knowledge, right? Today, 83% of farming households have access to cell phones. I say that cell phones have become the most powerful farming equipment today, right? If you look from a production perspective to post-harvest to the way the markets are being generated, we have examples after examples. NABARD, I'm sure, has several examples of that. Women farmers in Bihar selling their goats on OLX, the eBay-like platform from Bihar to as far as Surat, Uber tractors, all of this is based on the digital infrastructure. Farmers don't need probably that much more information now. They need institutional support for those information. If one sees a place like Raigada in Orissa, which is one of the economically most backward districts or areas of this country, an average farmer can download 13 apps that gives them information about agriculture on their phone. Okay? Consistency in that information that they are getting, some kind of an institutional backup, some kind of a quality control on those data that's available to them. I think that's what is very, very important. If I was the government, I would not invest in bringing 2 more new apps. If I was the government, I would set up a quality control body in terms of what the farmer is getting. Infrastructure is a great thing, and our investments in infrastructure is really, really paying off well. But having infrastructure is more like, owning a library doesn't make you knowledgeable.
Or a reader. Yes.
Absolutely. Being able to read and to utilize those books is where it helps you. That's exactly where the situation is right now. There are digital infrastructure, there is connectivity, there is a very, very large number of players out there. What the farmers require is a kind of a quality and also more connection to the market rather than just most apps telling them how to grow more. It's not the question of how to grow more, it's the question of how to optimize the price of what they grow.
Wonderful. And so, Sanjeev, there's 2 challenges that have been thrown. One's for the government, so we won't go into that, but I think it's a great challenge about quality control, although you may have some views on whether the private sector can deliver something like that. But this connectivity to markets as well. And other areas of innovation that you are seeing as you're investing. Do you see in the agriculture space some exciting stuff?
Lots of stuff, but that is agri-tech, not necessarily climate tech. Okay, but let's go to agri-tech. We've invested in a number of companies. For example, there's a company called Gramophone, okay, which we went into. Now, Gramophone was this 3 guys, IIT Kharagpur, agricultural engineering. I am Ahmedabad, special program in agriculture, the postgraduate program. And they went and they set up shop in Indore. Right? Indore is typically not, at that time was not this great startup hub. They were one of the first ones there. Now, of course, Indore has developed a lot as a startup hub. And they started a service. Now, Gramophone is not gramophone as in the record playing thing. Gram, village, and phone. Right? And they put out a number where they said farmers can call up and tell us their problems. And we'll give you the right advice. Now, there are 3 guys who got some domain expertise in agriculture, some knowledge, some education. They built a database. And the farmer would call up and say, okay, send me a picture of the leaf of the plant where you have a problem. Now, they would feed it in, and they would do the analysis, and they would say, okay, this is the problem you're having, this is the solution. Now, this is fairly new age. The government could have done it. The government was not doing it. Or maybe if it was, then it wasn't so easily accessible, or perhaps the farmers didn't know. I do not know. But these guys began to do it, right? And gradually, the service gained traction. Okay, because word of mouth spread that if you call up this number free of cost, they will tell you what to do, and they're experts on the other end. Now, when they began to gain farmer trust and some traction, and they built this knowledge database of farmers because the customers give them data. This is where I'm located. This is where my farm is, and they had satellite data to figure out what the soil was, what kind of soil they got, and where exactly they're located. They began to do e-commerce with the farmers. The farmers trusted them. And so the particular insight was that the farmer relies on the retailer to advise the farmer on what to do when there's a problem. Now, there's a clear conflict of interest. Huge. Where the retailer typically oversells. Ye bhi lo, ye bhi lo, ye bhi lo. So when two things are needed, he'll go and sell 5 things. Makes more money. Very often, the distribution channel sells what they say is duplicate mal, not original. Aapko malum hai, sir? Okay. Now, these guys say, we give a guarantee, we'll give you right advice, and we give you a guarantee that we'll sell you the right stuff. And they began to do business. So there's enough examples of stuff like that. This is agri inputs only. Sure. On the output side, there are people who are helping them reach markets, they buy their stuff. We met a very interesting company. So in the 70s and 80s, the government had made massive investments in we will fund small warehouses in villages. Mm-hmm. So entrepreneurs came out, local village entrepreneurs came out with ideas that fund my small warehouse. So warehouses were put up, but they were not used. That scheme eventually did not deliver. So this whole infrastructure was set up. Warehouses, but not being used. So what this company did, it began to aggregate those defunct warehouses, small warehouses, okay, and just rented them. So now the warehouse owner is getting a fixed rent. He's happy. Then what they told the farmers is, we will store your produce in this warehouse. So right now you're forced to sell when you harvest, and the price then is low because of a glut in the market. You just give us your stuff, and you sell it 3 months later. We'll charge you a small commission as rent. But you have to have the ability to hold out for 3 months without having to sell. Okay. Now the farmer's usually taken a loan. So he needs to pay the loan. So he can't hold out. So then they tied up with an NBFC. Right? And they said that you give the farmer a loan so he can pay off the other loan. And when the farmer sells his produce, you will get your money back plus interest. Now the NBFC's interest rate is much, much more reasonable as opposed to a private lender. The private lender is usually also the retailer.
Yeah. So another conflict of interest.
Yeah. So there's enough things happening. It's just that investors have to understand this will not scale up on a hockey stick the way a digital company might.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you're looking at VC returns of 10x or 20x or 30x, in this kind of business, that won't happen. But if you are okay to live with more modest returns, perhaps lower risk, then a model like this could work. And it might take longer than 7-8 years, could take 15 years to actually go public or scale or something. But it's a very useful thing. They have simply aggregated old warehouses, which already existed but not being used. They're paying the owner's rent. They're storing farmer's produce. The farmer is able to get a better price 3 months, 6 months later when it's off season. Right? And it's working quite well. So stuff is happening.
No, and I think this is actually a good point to end on, because unfortunately I would have lots more questions, but we're out of time. But I will just say this one takeaway. I think this whole journey of the Bharat Climate Forum has been about making India competitive in this new space. And I think all three of you have shown that where it comes to the intersectionality of digital and green, India has already got a lot of competitive advantages because of its investment in some of that core infrastructure, and I think partly because it's made a lot of core infrastructure public. In many other countries, it is privately owned, and in India, we're making some big investments now in the space of agri as well to start to create that stack. And I think there's a lot of promise that all three of you have shown, obviously the vibrant ecosystem that we have on entrepreneurship, the fact that we have these smallholder farmers that are forward-leaning, and that we're building this infrastructure. So I think this has been a fantastic panel to sort of understand the role of digital alongside green. And I'd like you to put your hands together and thank our wonderful panelists. Thank you.